listening to Resilience Radio on home and hospital births with Midwife-Erin Mandeville. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show and owner of Resilience Occupational Therapy. As always, the opinions on this show are not necessarily shared by me. I like to feature a variety of different perspectives, and everyone has different healthcare needs. Additionally, none of it's meant to be medically diagnostic or prescriptive in any way. I'm excited to have Erin Mandeville on today. She's a certified midwife, certified nurse midwife, who started as a certified professional midwife in Alaska, where she did home and birth center practice. Great to have you on, Erin.
It's great to be here.
Could you start us off by telling us what midwifery is?
Sure. It's a multivariate question or answer. So what complicates that answer in the US is that there's many different ways to be a midwife. We sort of have an alphabet soup of licensure that varies state to state, but most likely the easiest way to answer that question is that, so I'm as you mentioned, a certified nurse midwife. So I work, that license allows me to work either at doing home birth in the hospital. I do obstetric care and catch babies and do prenatal and postpartum care, but also menopause care, contraception. Many CNMs do abortions as well. So there's just sort of a larger scope of what we cover. As a CPM, I did a certified professional midwife doing home birth. I did prenatal care, antepartum care, postpartum care only. And then there's a lot more nuance state to state and license to license, but that's the short answer.
And it's my understanding that there is sort of, and I'm sure I'm oversimplifying this, two basic categories of midwives. There's the nurse midwives that tend to work within a hospital system. And then there is the home midwives. And earlier this season, we featured a home midwife, but you're both, is my understanding.
Yeah, so I actually have not kept up my home birth, the CPM license. There are many CNMs that do home birth as well, or that work in freestanding birth centers as well. I would say probably the majority do work in hospitals, but it's a license that gives you flexibility to do any of those, to have your own practice, to work in a group practice, to work in a birth center, to work in a hospital. I'm sure there are other combinations of those things.
So what led you from being a home and birth center midwife to being a nurse midwife in hospital?
Let's see. It was a combination of things. So as a home birth midwife, I had a sort of sleepy little practice in Alaska, in rural Alaska. And I also worked in several of the birth centers there, and some of the bigger cities, which is, I'm chuckling because Alaska doesn't really have big cities, but the bigger towns. And then I had an opportunity to go to India for a year to help start a birth center there. And I really liked the ability to have a sense of continuity of care. So we had our own clients, birthing clients, who, if they had, say they needed a C-section, we were right there, and the OB would come to the C-section, but we would stay with them and continue caring in the capacity that we could. I liked that model. And I thought to myself, wow, it would be great, when I return to the US, it would be great to work in this capacity. I wish we had something like that in the US. And I was like, oh wait, I think we do. I think it's a CNM. And then I also had moved back to the Boston area there at the time, and still, I believe, was not licensure and regulation for certified professional midwives. And I was also just considering getting older and wanting to not be on call 24/7 all the time. And some home birth midwives do work in groups and they get time off and they figure that out. Um, and then there was also the piece of wanting to do menopause care and contraception and care for people who, just a more diverse clientele who maybe, couldn't pay for a home birth out of pocket. And there's, yeah, many reasons why it was an intriguing transition.
So menopause care and contraception are not part of most home midwife scope of practice?
Generally not, unless someone has additional training, maybe they've studied, herbs, or they've have a naturopath degree. They might have additional training or licensure that allows them to do that. But generally, as a CPM, you're doing obstetric and midwifery care.
Okay. So I imagine it's a very different setting working in people's homes and in the birthing centers than working with the hospital system. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. And I'm gonna try to choose my words carefully because ultimately, I think some people have really strong feelings that one is better than another, and I don't feel that way. I feel like it's great that we have all these options and that people should birth where they feel most comfortable to birth. Um, and the differences that I see are also colored by who I was, when I became a CPM, and who I am now. And while there's some common themes that haven't changed and some sentiments that haven't changed, I also just have a different perspective after working in multiple settings. So if I can remember your original question now.
It was comparing the two settings.
Yeah. I think, there's nothing like a home, like, you're not a home, like, sorry, your home environment. It's your space. It's familiar to you, it's comfortable to you, you're in your own, you're grounded in yourself in your own space. It's a joy. I loved doing home birth. For that reason, I loved also getting, a window into people's stories and lives and who they were, and just really having that non-interventive approach, which is not, you can still, I still have those births in a hospital. That's still possible. It's also a bit of a self-selecting population. Generally, people that want to have a home birth are wanting to take more responsibility on for their own well-being, and are coming from maybe a slightly different philosophy around, their pregnancy and birth and that journey. There can be a really nice feeling. There can also be, that there are people who get there and feel like, oh, I thought I was going to love this and feel at home in my own space, and actually I really don't feel like this is where I want to be. And a certain percent, I think most people would quote about 10% of all planned home births end up transferring in for some reason. Sometimes that's the desire from pain medication, or something's not going in a direction that feels safe anymore, or there's an urgent need to transfer in. So, and then in terms of hospital setting, and then there's birth centers, which is sort of a whole nother thing. There's a lot of variation. I worked in a busy Boston area hospital that had a really different feel from the small rural Vermont hospital that I'm working in now. There, I mean, the biggest, probably the answer that people expect is it's more institutionalized. There, we a lot of hospitals routinely draw labs and place IVs and sort of have this whole set of um, protocols and things that feel more interventive. When I first started doing births in a hospital, actually in a doula capacity while I was going through midwifery school, CNM school, um, little things like, you know, people not knocking on the door before they went in, like made it very apparent that like this laboring person is on our turf, which is a really different dynamic than someone in their own space. Um, there are plenty of people who work in hospitals that do have that awareness, but there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of places that don't have that awareness. um, but I think the thing over the years and just seeing, so many different birth settings and so many different births and interacting with so many different practitioners, um, the common theme of bringing love and presence and awareness and care to your birth, whether that's a C-section or a hospital birth or a home birth or a birth center birth or, all the above. Babies are born in many places. That, we can do that in any setting. Um, you may be limited by the people who are attended by and their ability to hold space for that and bring that presence, but I've certainly been at, I've gotten schmoopy and teary-eyed and moved at births in every setting. And people have had wonderful experiences in both settings. So I think, there are differences. When I started out as a home birth midwife, I really felt like, everyone should have a home candlelit water birth to Enya, and I don't feel that way anymore. I've had rave births. I've had, there's many ways to do this, and there's no right way to do this.
So people have fairly limited exposure to births, either their own or I mean, if they're giving birth, most people don't remember their own birth, but or if they're attending somebody else's birth, and then of course the dramatization of birth on TV. What do you feel like, from your perspective, having worked in these different settings, might surprise people the most, or can you give us a sense of a counter narrative to what people's experiences might be?
That's a tricky one. Well, I mean, there's the obvious, I mean, you mentioned TV and hospital birth, very rarely, and we don't really want it to unfold that way. The dramatic, like screaming and really like blowing out a baby is not it's really not what anyone's going for, most of the time. There's an intensity in the room, but it doesn't happen like that, and the pushing part is usually really slow and not as dramatic. I was sort of mulling over that question and thinking that where my mind went with what's surprising actually was something more related to birth in the state of Vermont specifically. I think one thing that surprised me and surprises a lot of people about birth, and this doesn't have anything to do with like the birth room and the birth itself, but is that Vermont does not allow birth centers. Freestanding birth centers are not allowed in Vermont. That surprised me about birth. It's really different. I'm going in a different direction with your question. But I think of this state as being very supportive of options for people in general, and home birth. There's a robust home birth sort of desire for home birth and home birth midwives in this state, and births, having the option of birthing in a birth center.
And could you define what a birth center is versus the other types of
that's a little
birth
tricky.
settings?
So yeah, absolutely, and there's nuance to that too. So there are, hospitals have some hospitals call their labor and delivery unit a birth center. So there's in-hospital birth centers. There are hospital-owned freestanding birth centers, so a building that is not attached to the main part of the hospital, but that is run and operated by um, a hospital. And then there are independently owned freestanding birth centers, which often are owned by midwives. Not always. There's a lot of variety, but that are not bound to. They're bound to, you know, legislation and statute and practice protocols and all those things, but they're not bound to the protocols of a hospital, which can be just more interventive minded in general. And most states have independently owned freestanding birth centers. There are only 10 states that don't license and regulate them, that don't have sort of a pathway to create them. And there are only, I believe, 7 states that don't have them, and we're one of them, and we're like one of the only ones in New England. So that's shocking about birth.
What do you attribute that to?
So I'm actually, and there's legislation that exists right now to try to change that. I don't know. I'm not the best person to ask about the history of that, but it definitely has to do partly with fears that that it would sort of drain the small birthing population. It would limit the amount of people going to hospitals, even though that's been shown in the literature to not be true. It actually increases use of ancillary services like ultrasound and lab and pharmacy and all those things. And people are leaving the state to go have home births. Birth center births in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York. So that fear is really unfounded, but I think, yeah, lack of a push I can't say lack of a push for change, because there's been legislation introduced for several sessions now. Yeah.
So it seems like there is a lot of options for maybe not the freestanding clinic, but in Vermont, but hospital births and in-home deliveries, and there's various ways all those can be. And I could see that being very overwhelming for a lot of soon-to-be parents or people thinking about becoming parents. Do you have any words of advice for how to navigate that process and sort of develop a home birth plan? Or a birth plan. There's my own bias, because there's my bias because our child was a home birth as a disclaimer. Yeah. So that's where my mind goes. But on how to come up with a birth plan in general and navigate that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think some people really have a strong sense already of what they're hoping for, and then some people either plan or find themselves pregnant and really haven't thought that much and have a lot of homework to do. Yeah, I think the first question to ask yourself is, where are you going to feel most comfortable? The first step of deciding, home versus hospital. I think there's also a tendency to get there's a lot of sort of shoulds and a lot of media, and now I would say that motherhood and pregnancy, and I want to acknowledge that not everyone that has a baby identifies as a mother, but we've certainly branded motherhood in this country and probably in the world like all things that we do well in a capitalist consumer society. We've made all these things that you can buy and do the right way. And so I think for a lot of people, the first thing that comes up when they're thinking about home versus hospital is sort of like all of the rhetoric and opinions and what does that mean about me and what's the best way to have a baby. And so as challenging as it may be, for people to just let all that go, let all that noise go, and really kind of sit with, in my heart of hearts, what is going to feel best to me. And to leave options, to know that, do your homework, do your research, think about what you want. There's a lot of choice points involved. But at the end of the day, what is going to feel best to you? How are you going to feel best supported in terms of location? And then beyond that, there's so many, whether it's home or hospital, there's so many other ways to prepare. Yoga, stretching, being active, mindfulness practice. There's just a million things.
Okay. Well, I feel like we covered a lot of ground today. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experience with those two different settings. It was really great talking with you today.
Yeah, thank you.
That was Erin Mandeville speaking about home births and hospital births. This is Resilience Radio. If you enjoyed what you heard today, you can recommend it to a friend or leave a 5-star review on the podcatcher of your choice. Thank you to Aaron Marcus for providing the music for this show from their tune Some Biological Process. For full credits on that music, you can check out the show notes. Take care.